Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are talking about taking church online. This is our fourth installment, and today we are focusing on giving and financials. So this is a joint effort between the Church IT Network and Ministry Platform teams, and it has been a joy to work with Church IT Network on this, and our goal in all of this is to provide and equip the church, no matter what system you use, with resources, tools, ideas, encouragement to get through this very unique and interesting time that we find ourselves in, and trying to figure out how to plan and forecast and move forward in all of this. So we have lots of great panelists with us today and some good questions to talk about. So thank you for joining us. We are joined today, as usual, by Jason Lee from the Church IT Network and Chris Cahias from Ministry Platform. They will be introducing us to the panelists and kind of manning the questions and getting our panelists engaged in questions. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Absolutely.
As always, we're recording, so if you watch this and want to rewatch it or want to share it with somebody who wasn't able to join us today, we will get the link out onto our website along with a ton of other links. Anything that's mentioned, the lovely Trace is on with me today, and she keeps track of all the resources that are mentioned and gets those onto our knowledge base so that you can use them and share them. So please leverage these resources we've been compiling for you, and we pray that they are a blessing. We will be monitoring the question chat, so post any questions that you have there, and we will be answering those, and if necessary, throwing them out to the panel as well. So please, like I said, share this. We want this to be a resource for the Big C Church, and you can do that on social media by using the hashtag #TakingChurchOnline. So I will let Chris introduce our panelists.
All right, we're super excited to have Mark Brooks joining us today. He's from Acts 17. He's a generosity coach. I think Stephen Ballard introduced us and connected us together, but we're really excited to have you, Mark, and maybe just one or two quick things, maybe more than what I said. What do you do and why are you here?
That's a good question. Why am I here? So, boy, that's the loaded one. Hey, for 20 years, I was a senior pastor, and I'd always been very interested in giving and those kinds of things. And so I had a friend that recommended me to John Maxwell's company. And so I went to work for John Maxwell's company, helping churches do capital campaigns. About 15 years ago, I figured out that the world was changing and we needed to be thinking beyond a capital campaign. We need to be thinking about giving 365 days a year. And so I kind of morphed into more than just doing capital campaigns. It's week to week to week to really becoming a generosity strategist. And now I do a lot of writing on generosity, but that's kind of what I do. I coach church leaders and pastors and try to help them through times like this.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here today. Do you still run? I see that marathon shirt.
Yeah, I do. And I'm not sure I'm marathon. Well, I know I'm not marathon ready yet, but a good marathoner always says, I got one more. I don't want to quit at 25. There's a 26 one out there somewhere.
There's always one more in us. Always one more in us. All right, Megan Brown. I've actually got to hang out with Megan before. She came to one of our user groups in the past. She's the director of sales at Mortarstone, and we're really glad you guys are here. A quick one, what's Mortarstone do and why do you love it?
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel honored to be here and a part of this. And hello to everybody out there. Welcome to Working in a New Way. So I'm Megan Brown, and I have been in this financial arena for the past 17 years. I was a financial planner for 7 of them. I was a stewardship pastor for 7 of them at a multi-site location church in Amarillo, Texas. And I was a client of Mortarstone's, and now I am the director of sales at Mortarstone. And so Mortarstone is an analytics data provider where we look at giving and givers and then help you understand who are those precious people that are attached to the other end of your giving, and how do we develop and build relationships with them through managing not just by fact, which is the data, but also by intuition. And how do we bridge that gap and create long-term sustainable funding? And so that's who Mortarstone is. That's what I get to help people to do every day. And it is a lot of fun. And I'm excited for the opportunity that the church has during this season. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of this panel with this great group of guys and gals.
Okay. We're glad you're here today with us. All right, we've got Mr. Glenn Wood, Mr. Excel Extraordinaire, and also the church administrator at Seacoast. You see all the head bobbing, Glenn? That's all I got to say. Excel Extraordinaire, and the head bobbing starts. So I've appreciated the pre-show time because Glenn was picking on Jason Lee. And as you all know, anyone who picks on Jason Lee finds a warm spot in my heart. So Glenn, anything you want to add besides, church administrator, Seacoast, and Excel Extraordinaire?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Over the last probably year and a half, I've done about 4 or 5 conference topic sessions on working remotely and just kind of how churches are doing it. And so, now I think it's the norm and not the exception. When I did the first one probably a year and a half ago, there were probably only 5 or 6 churches that would say, yeah, we allow people to work remotely. Now I think every church in America is going, yeah, we're all working remotely. So it's interesting, but we're working from home. My wife is a nurse. She's actually working in the next room. So, we're trying to manage working remotely as a family, but it's good. It's fun. I love what I do and just blessed to be able to serve the kingdom.
Well, we're glad that you're here today. Last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Ackerman. Hello. We share the same first name. So I know we've known each other for like 5 or 6 years now, I think, right, Chris? He's the director of admin at Ward Church, and we're just excited to have him on the call today. Anything you want to add before we dive in? I don't have like an Excel Extraordinaire to throw your way. I mean, I see you all the time at conferences and things, but I don't have anything fun. I have no fun factoid.
I'd like to stay that way, but no, things are good. Thanks so much for having me on. I look forward to participating today.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. Is Glenn so appropriately kind of kicked us off with, Ken, are you here? Have we heard Ken?
I have not heard him.
Okay.
You must have dropped
Ken
out.
Emmert may join us. He is another exec pastor, church administrator from Pure Heart Church out in the Arizona area. And we seem to be missing Ken at the moment. But if he joins us in a few minutes, maybe Trace, if you're listening, can you try to find out where Ken is and see if he's having trouble connecting? This topic is sensitive. It's tough for some of our pastors. It's tough for some of our ministry leaders, but it's also necessary. Without the money flowing in the door, ministry doesn't happen. So let's just bathe this whole thing in prayer, and then we'll dive right in. And Ken has joined us. All right, Heavenly Father, thank you today. Thank you for this team that you've put together for such a time as this. It's hard. I want to say thank you for the challenges that you present us. I don't know that everybody on the call would agree that we're thankful for this challenge, but it certainly is stretching us and helping the church to adapt to an ever-changing world. So for that, I thank you. I do just pray that as we begin to talk about strategies and tips for trying to survive what will certainly become a bit of a financial crisis for the church as well, that you would just give everyone wisdom, not to just to hear the things that are being said and things that are happening around the country, but to be able to sift through them and figure out the pieces and parts that work for their churches and their local bodies. We love and praise you. Just bless the time together today. Amen.
Amen.
Well, we're going to dive right in. So we heard a few seconds ago, working from home. I mean, clearly we see backdrops. It looks like everybody but Ken is working from home, unless, Ken, are you home? No. It seems like we're all pretty much working from home right now, and the world is very different. So with that, we have a poll here. Are we going to poll everybody, Megan?
Yes, we are. So just a quick question as we get started here, just to kind of see who's on and what's going on in your specific church regarding online giving. We are asking what percentage of your giving was coming from online before the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, and I can kind of see the numbers growing and moving right now.
I'm wondering how many people have to change their answers for not reading the whole thing.
All right, looks like we've kind of slowed down in our number change. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this and launch the results for you.
Fantastic. All right. So that's very interesting. So most people were somewhere between 26 and 75% of online giving. So that's...
And a whole quarter below 25%. That's, yeah.
Very interesting. All right. Well, diving in today, obviously things are changing. So we're going to hear, I guess, from Mark Brooks and then Megan Brown maybe first, and they're going to give us a little bit of an overview. So since they work with a number of churches, either from the coaching and also on the strategy side, we're just going to kind of hear from them for a few minutes about what they're seeing trend-wise, and we will see how everybody does with that. So Mark, you want to go ahead and take it away for us?
Sure. And I think that where we started was a good way to start the conversation, because in my view, the question is, well, how is COVID-19 impacting churches? The answer is always, it depends. It depends a lot on where you are regionally in the country, obviously, as this rolls out, but a lot of it depends on, do you have or have you had the existing tools in place that you need? Now, what we're doing now is we're all scrambling to get those in place, live stream and that kind of thing. But if you had online giving, you're going to be able to weather this storm much better than those who are just now ramping up, or those who had online giving and really weren't utilizing the tool effectively. Tool's only as good as what you use it for. So a lot of times we use a hammer like a screwdriver and a screwdriver like a hammer. And so this is what I'm finding. The churches that have the systems already in place are rebounding, if that's the word I want, much better than those that don't have the systems in place. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do with our clients, is very quickly establish what they need to do in the immediate, and that's right now, and then what do they need to do long term? Because one of the things we can do, and I think this is, the immediate sucks the life out of good leadership, and we've got to begin thinking about what's next and beyond that. But our quick read is those who had good systems in place are not as severely impacted as those that didn't. And then those who did a good job of generosity education and that kind of thing are in a better position than those who very rarely talked about generosity or stewardship. They're the ones who are going to be struggling the most. So that's kind of what we see, just a real quick look at the overview. And trust me, it's a changing climate almost week to week to week. But I think those are some of the things we're seeing right off the bat.
What kind of percentages are you seeing, if you can, broad strokes, or is it all over the place as well?
It is all over the place, and I think Megan can speak to this much greater, because their pool of numbers is greater than what I'm looking at. But just as I'm looking at our clients and we're tracking through that, you do see wild variances. For instance, I have a $500,000 church that I'm coaching, and the first Sunday of closure, their normal offering is about $10,000, a little bit north of that. Their first Sunday, they took in $500. And then they do have online giving. Now, the next Sunday, they took $3,800. Last Sunday, they took $5,000. So during these next 8 weeks, that's the pivotal time. And what I'm saying to churches is, with a grain of salt, please understand this. I'm just saying your goal right now is just to survive from a financial end, if you will. And so again, it runs the gamut of what different churches are seeing. My church, and Glenn might be able to speak to this, Glenn and I both are members of Seacoast. I just texted with Jason Surratt, and they were trending 25% decline into March, but have seen an uptick. So it really does depend church to church to church, but all of us need to be aware that we're in uncharted territory, and moving forward, none of us know what is this going to look like. And so the best plans are do the immediate, but get ready for what this is going to look like 120, 240 days out. Those are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about.
Nice. Thank you for that, Mark. Yeah, we're going to pivot over, and Megan, can you maybe pick up and start there, and then we'll kind of keep going. But what are you guys seeing? I think you mentioned before you're working with roughly 1,500 churches. So what does the spread of, variance from normal kind of look like right now?
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. So we have worked with over 1,500 churches. I'm not sure what the real number is right now, so I would love to say that were the case. We'd love for you to be one of those 1,500 churches. So, shameless plug. Come on. You introduced me as the sales director. But honestly, we've seen in the last couple of weeks, as we've been really analyzing and looking at the churches that we do have on board, we've seen anywhere from a church's giving. This is both from online recurring giving and then check and cash. We look at all of that. We've seen it be down anywhere from 3% to 63%. And then we've also seen churches that have grown in that number as well. So we've seen some churches who have excelled, that they haven't decreased at all, rather they've had upticks. And that just goes to show that we've got to have foundations of who it is that we're speaking to. And we have to be innovative and creative about the ways that we're talking to our givers about where the giving is going and what it is that we're using those dollars for during COVID-19, but also, as Mark alluded to, what are we doing long term? So not only do we need to think about how we're communicating with our brand new givers, with those who have lapsed in giving, those who have changed their recurring giving pattern changes, we've got to be able to analyze and pull each of those subsets of people and be able to have a communication strategy around them, as well as look at age demographics and the socioeconomic strata of how this can be affecting your givers. And then talk to them about the opportunities that you are doing while the church doors are shut, then, and there's no building necessarily that we're meeting in. You may actually have a broader scope of people that you're reaching far more people now than what you might have done on weekend services 2 to 3 weeks ago. So looking at those individual trend analysis, making sure that you have a strategy and a plan for your levels of givers, that you're using the key opportunity right now to pick up the phone and relationally connect with your givers. Your pastoral staff is helping, your ministry staff is helping, your elders are helping to communicate and love on these people, to pray for them, especially those with lapsed giving pattern changes, or even brand new givers coming on. You have an opportunity of a lifetime. So my favorite phrase is, if we have to take advantage of the opportunity of a lifetime during the lifetime of the opportunity. And that means that we have to think differently about how we're going to speak and share this message that will, by and large, always be the same. The why we're doing and the what we're doing, it's not changed. But the how we're doing it, it has. And perhaps it might forever change. But y'all, because I'm from Texas, y'all, so y'all, this is not abnormal for a nonprofit sector. So we have to start to think in that vein as churches. The parachurch ministries and higher education universities have always thought about getting to have a captive audience. They would love the fact that we get to have a captive audience. They would die for a weekend service. But we get the opportunity of a lifetime to have a captive audience every weekend, and to now see our numbers on our online services go up. So we just have to have the communication plan in place, be able to get to our information quickly, set firm infrastructures going forward, and make sure that we are, as Mark alluded to, thinking about the short term. What can I do this week? What's my call to action to reach out to my givers today? And then long term, how can we create long-term sustainable funding that can weather the terms of all economic climates? Because it's there in place. We can think that way. And how can we also not only think about those things, but how we're going to continue to leave legacies for the future church. And we are setting the pace for how that's going. So
that's great. Let me dive in for a second there. So I think, well, we're gonna pivot just a little bit because we do have a clock here, but I heard something really great from Mark and then you, and now I want to get the other guys to chime in, and then we're going to start pulling. We've got a list of questions that we want to try to jam through, but Mark started with the whole deal with the short term, planning for the long term. You threw some great tips in there real fast on, take advantage of this opportunity, get on the phone. Maybe even you're a church who doesn't like calling your congregation or your donors, but hey, God has given us a perfect opportunity to make a pivot there. But I want to get the other guys real fast though, since you guys are, if you will, in the trenches. Throw your top tip for the short term out. What are you doing? How have you had to pivot? And I know I can see Chris's eyes. He's like, I'm being thrown on the spot. You don't have to go first. I love this whole video thing. We got to do this for all of our webinars. But give me your top tip in the short term. What are you guys doing? Or for churches out there who maybe are in that place of, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. What do I do first? Let's give them some very practical, what do we do first items.
I'll jump in here. I was actually talking with an administrator of a church up in Pennsylvania, and one of the things that they did that I very much appreciated and liked is that they actually got their elders together and they called every household in their church. And there was probably I mean, they're a substantial church. So, I think they gave everybody 20 names. I'm going to say 20 names, and there are 200 people involved. I'll say, I can't remember what the numbers were, but they basically called them all and said, how are you doing? How can we pray for you? Here's what we're doing, in terms of holding services. And actually didn't initially talk about giving at all. It was just, how can we as a church support you through this process? And then from there, you can open up the discussion of, talk about giving if you want to, but mainly it was just reaching out to them. And I've heard this from a number of churches is just trying to reach out to the congregation and just be practical. He said, honestly, the whole conversation probably lasted less than 2 minutes apiece. So it wasn't a long, you're not asking your elders to get into a deep theological discussion, about Revelations and how that's going to impact their lives. It just was real quick. Let's talk about what can we do? How can we pray for you? Here's what we're doing as a church and moving on. So again, I thought it was incredibly practical. At Seacoast, a lot of our engagement is more on the social media side, just trying to empower staff and get the information out. I mean, we've had an online campus for a number of years, so it wasn't hard for us to, to change that. Now we've tweaked the format and all, but trying to work through a lot of social engagement and get that information out, not only to our pastoral staff, but our ministry staff and even our small group leaders, so that we can resource them to get the information out about, here's what we're doing for services, and here's what's different, and here's how you can create a watch party, and just trying to engage the congregation along that line. And I think from an attendance side, we've seen actually phenomenal attendance over the last couple of weeks, and I think probably reaching more than we ever have. I think I was talking with somebody the other day, and I said, I think there probably has been more innovation in how church gets done in the last 3 weeks than in probably the last 10 or 12 years. It's just
absolutely. Yeah.
Because we've been forced to. We have to figure out how to do it differently, and so that's my take.
Nice, very nice. All right, Chris or Ken?
We're not big compared to some of you, but our online logins, we were running around 1,300 logins. And 2 weeks ago, we were at over 5,000. This last weekend, we were over 6,000. And we're doing two things. Number one, we're getting ready. In fact, they're working on the script right now to calling all of our people. The other thing we did on the service side is we have a resource center, food pantry. And we've gone from 3 days a week to 6 days a week. But we just started that this last week. So, we're concentrating on the serving side also.
That's great. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And for us up here in Michigan, we actually did our phone calls were a little more targeted. We chose everyone 65 and older to call in our database because we felt they would have less opportunity to get connected through some of our other means. And we're just actually starting the second round of calling them. We called them one time, did exactly what Glenn was saying. How are you doing? How can we pray for you? Do you need help? Can you give help? And that was really encouraging to hear those stories and all that. And then we too have, like Ken was saying, we've really been pushing, give help, get help is kind of like two things. We redid our homepage that it's basically focused around coronavirus. Another thing that possibly you could consider, you have the resources. We just redid the homepage and it's really focused on, like I said, get help, give help. That was right before Ministry Platform launched its tool to help in that as well. But it's been great seeing people connect and serving from our local community to our school districts. The other thing we did is we did a segmented, much like Megan was talking about, we did a segmented mailing, actually a paper mailing to some of our top donors and then like our consistent, faithful donors. But we had different messages for each of these groups. We actually mailed letters to them, asking them to ask, how they could help, trying to help connect them to different ways as well. So those are some of the top 3 things that we've been doing right now.
Well, I forced Jason Lee to sit there on camera and not really say anything for the last few minutes. So he's going to dive in and help with some of our ongoing questions. But thank you guys all for being here. It's really cool to hear. I mean, I'll throw down one last piece of encouragement. I mean, it is an interesting thing. I talked with my pastor yesterday, and we saw 80 decisions for Christ this weekend. So that's kind of his thing. So our church chose to potentially do some innovation around how we find out about those. So that's been a really exciting thing. Like, I mean, he knows giving's down, but he's more excited to hear how many people made a decision this weekend as opposed to what's the damage from the weekend. But all right, Jason, lead us through our next couple of questions.
All right. Well, one of the values of Church IT Network is peer learning and inspiration and collaboration. And so, a lot of these questions are probably things that many of the people on this event are facing. Maybe it will help to kind of talk through some of the things that you guys are experiencing and some of the ways that you're trying to tackle it and process it through. And so that's really just the intent of the questions we have lined up, is just kind of share how you're processing through the current scenarios and the current situation of ministry that we're in. And maybe that will help somebody feel, misery loves company, or give them some creative ideas to kind of spur some ways to improve what they're doing. So the first question up is just, what are some of the heaviest financial burdens that you're carrying for your church right now? What are you trying to navigate that maybe you weren't navigating 3 or 4 weeks ago? Or maybe to Megan and to Mark, what are some of the trends that you're seeing with your clients, as well as some of the heavy burdens that they're carrying that maybe that just didn't exist 3 or 4 weeks ago?
I can weigh in and give you kind of where we're at, early on. And I'm the guy, and every pastor needs a guy who's always asking the question, how's that going to impact giving? And I always tell my pastors, God gifted you with mercy. I'm real low on the mercy scale. I'm like 100% on admin side, so we got to have the Aaron and hers to hold up the Moses's hands. And so here's what we developed real quickly. It's a 3-pronged attack. First is caution, take care of your people. The second was compassion, be the church. And that lends back to what Megan said earlier. How you get people to give in this day and age is you show them what you're doing. And the church never gets the press of all the wonderful things we do. And I've always said this, whenever there's a crisis in the world, the church is always the first responder. You know why? Because we're already there. Well, now the crisis has come to our shores, and this is our moment. This is our time. But the third prong that I focus on is the sustainability. And it goes back to what I said previously. You got to keep your eye on the ball. So we talk about 5 immediate things. Cut your spending. I mean, that's the first thing you've got to do. I'm saying to my clients, cut your budget. You can always add it back in, but cut your budget right now. And then I came up with this in a webinar, and I said, turn the thermostat down. And a guy said, man, when you said that, I yelled down the hall, because they still were open to my admin guy. We need to redo our settings on all the thermostats. My point there is cut waste out. And the fourth was this, think 30, 60, 90, and 100 days out. And that's what the admin people, the executive pastor, the finance people, that's their role. And then the fifth was, you got to be real careful how you say this, guy, but protect your assets. And you got to think about your bank loans and those kinds of things moving forward, because this too will pass, and we're going to be in a better position. It's going to be different, as Megan said, but it really is those kinds of things. If we'll do what I call the dailies, then that allows the pastors and the other visionary leaders to continue to cast that vision, because it's always about, here's what we're doing as a church. Your generosity helps us be able to do that. Thank you for your generosity. So we lead with compassion, and then you've built the case to make the appeal for people to give to support your work of ministry. Those are the things to do just right now. And I think some of the other things that you guys have been talking about are the practical things. Stay in touch with your people, stay in touch with your key donors. And I think you're going to find that they're going to really follow you if they know that you're in their corner from the very beginning.
Sure.
I want to jump in on this, and kind of the 2 areas that I'm spending a good bit of time looking at is, one is just the staffing side of it. And then 2 is on the banking side. I think, Ken, you were talking about, or Mark talking about making sure that you're talking to your banks. I mean, I've had a number of calls with our banker, from a financial standpoint, we have cash reserves and we're very solid. But again, just having the conversations with them, again, talking to administrators across the country, I've heard about banks that have said, you know what, we'll defer payments on your mortgage for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Let's talk about maybe only having you pay interest only for the next 30, 60, 90 days, and we'll defer the principal payments on those. One of the things I will say on that is, I think as churches, we need to be creative, and we need to go to the bank with solutions and say, here are a couple of ways we'd like to talk to you about doing, rather than asking the bank to come up with something. Because number one, bankers are great. I got a lot of friends that are bankers, but they are not creative people. They really couldn't figure out something very creative on their own. But if I go to them and go, hey, here are 2 or 3 ways that we would like to talk about working together, then they can respond. And are you going to get everything you want? Probably not. But I think you need to go to them with a couple of suggestions about maybe interest only, or defer principal, or just talk about restructuring some of these things and, moving forward. I mean, you also need to talk with your bank about loan covenants because, during this time, maybe you've had a significant drop in income. Well, you need to keep them abreast of what's going on the income side so that they're aware of what's happening. So again, I think these are all conversations that we need to have, just talking with the bank and then also on the staffing side, just trying to wrestle with, what can we as a church do? Are we going to continue? Are we paying our full-time staff? Are we paying our part-time staff? Are we paying them a portion of it? I mean, just trying to wrestle through and making some good, solid decisions based on your finances of what's coming in and, making some adjustments. Well, Mark, you were talking about cutting expenses. I think that's one of the big ones right now it's, you can cancel all travel because there are travel restrictions. Okay. So that's a cost saver. Well, we're not, you're not taking people out and buying dinners because all the restaurants are closed. So, okay, there's another cost. So, I mean, some of these are fairly straightforward, but we've even gone so far as to look at some of our reoccurring expenses on credit cards. And, like we have people that have, hey, I've got a Spotify account because I use that for X. And we've even gone in and said, what, for a time, we're going to ask you to suspend those or stop those so that if we're not meeting and we're not doing anything, honestly, I think it's going to be a while before we get back and get back in our buildings. There again, you go, well, it's only $15 a month. But yeah, if it's $15 a month and we've got 5 or 6 or 10 employees that are doing it and we're out for 4 or 5 months, that's a significant amount of money. And for us, we've got 13 campuses. So again, you multiply some of that out, you got to go, that's a chunk of money.
Yeah, and we've seen our big things are, personnel, same as Glenn was just saying about trying to figure out how we're going to be moving forward. We had established how far we told our staff that we would keep them through actually this next payroll, that we keep everybody whole. But beyond that, we're working through that. I mean, so that's one of our financial burdens, is trying to figure out how to care for our staff. Coming alongside of that is trying to understand this is not financial, but the legal side of things right now with the CARES Act and how that can potentially help during this time. Do we take steps to move forward with that, as well as other grants? That's not something that we have traditionally pursued, but I know like locally there are at least 3 other grants that we can pursue during this time that have to do with the COVID-19 situation. As Mark was talking about, the compassion side, how are we financially able to come alongside those who have financial needs? How are we finding those out? And just trying to, we're really working to carry that burden forward into, for the kingdom. So.
I think as you're thinking about that, that's so good, Chris, because I was speaking with a client this morning and we were trying to share with them. You had talked about it. They had said hand out or hand up, and you said you need a gift or you can give a gift. And I love the differences there, but I'm all about data. So we have to, again, manage by fact, and then we have to manage by intuition and be led by that. You can think of your people as being affected in 3 different areas. Those who are maybe kind of in a service sector and are getting hit really hard, and they're going to have a certain set of needs. And then there's the people that you could also segment as you're thinking about the financial needs that you're carrying, even your staff are carrying. And those are your professionals, and they're getting hit in a certain arena as well. And the third subsector to divide your data out and inspect what you expect and set some benchmarks around would be who's on a passive or fixed income, and this may not be as economically challenging for them. And then you can go to your data and look at your subsectors and say, let's look by age, let's look by our giving, who's giving in the lower levels that could be in one of those service sectors, and how are we going to be able to respond to them, maybe with the benevolence needs. What are our guidelines? Have we shored those up? Do they need help with budgeting, or do they just need a handout because this is just hard? That second sector, the professional workers, how are we going to build what the Bible says? How are we going to use the scriptures to come around that group of people and help include them in the things that we're doing, to say, hey, do you want to be a part of what we're doing? Invite them to be a part of being the hands and feet of Jesus in our community, whether that's with your time, your talent, or your resources. And then if you do have a subsector who's living on passive income that could possibly really give a sizable gift, now's the time to have the invitation to be able to share that with them and to communicate, this is what we're doing. This is what we, the church, are doing right now. And we're doing this in our community, and we're doing this with our people. Would you join us? would you help us with this? And so I think those financial needs that we're all facing individually as a globe right now, we get that time to say, this is a reset, and how do we shine during this time and make an imprint for the kingdom?
Ken, what are your thoughts?
Can I share one thing our executive pastor shared? You were talking about, the decisions. He heard that, guess what sold out at Barnes and Noble? Bibles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen several posts on Facebook of just Walmart's, the Bible aisle is just cleared out. Read a report the other day, just that the resurgence of people returning to faith because they have nothing else to turn to right now. I think that's it speaks a lot to us as a church of, is our culture and our community hungry, and what are they hungry for, and how are we meeting that need? I think it's a great point to make, Ken. Well, the next question we have is making some assumptions that there's a fair amount of online giving happening regularly on a normal season for your organizations. That may have changed in the last few weeks, but of those dollars coming in online, or maybe the checks being mailed in, as leaders are thinking about the outflow of cash and expenses related to the income that's coming in, how many weeks of reserves are you recommending that organizations or your organization is holding on to as reserves without spending the outflow of cash that's coming in? But what's that percentage of your giving per weekend, and then what are you trying to keep in a reserve? And then also just a longer term reserve, what are you aiming to keep in reserves right now as an organization?
I can give you a quick answer on that. I had a webinar 2 weeks ago with my friend Dennis Moses, who used to be vice president of one of the largest banks and head of church lending. And I had him on because, again, I've got a lot of clients that have got debt and they built buildings or they're moving towards that. And here's what he said to me right off the bat. He said, Mark, here's what banks want right now. They want 3 to 6 months of your operating expense held in reserve. Now, that has been the standard really since the crash of 2008. Banking rules kind of changed then. And so that's always been our advice to our clients. You need to have a reserve. But my friend Dennis Moses had this comment. He's calling this period what he calls the great reveal, because he says it's like the ocean suddenly was swept back and it reveals that everybody out there, they don't have any bathing suits on, they're naked. And so a lot of things are being revealed that churches are in a much more precarious situation than they should be. So that's something that they're going to have to think about long term. We're learning these lessons hard way sometimes, but you need to have a reserve built in, because who knows, I learned as a pastor, we had an air conditioner blow out one summer. Well, that was $25K. I didn't have $25K laying around. So what do you have to do? You got to go to your big donors and get in their pocket once again. And so you need to work towards that. At our church, it took us a period of years to where we budgeted that, but we did have a line item in reserve. Right now, if you don't have that, you're in a much more difficult position than you would be if you did have that. But that's kind of always been our goal. My personal goal with clients is at least 3 months. But again, I have had some banks look at a church and say, we won't even talk to you about a loan unless you've got 6. So 3 months is a good minimum, I think, to get there. But again, that's going to be something you're going to probably need to work towards. That's the long-term view. But think about this. And to Megan's point, it's a good point. We're always in crisis. Glenn and I know this because we live here on the coast and we've always got a hurricane. Glenn, we're going to lose at least one Sunday a year because of hurricane. And some of you guys are going to lose a Sunday because of snow. So there's smaller crises and then there's larger crises like this. You've got to have a reserve to be able to meet those kinds of crises. They will come your way.
I really liked that dig. Thank you, Mark, for rubbing it in. We may have hurricanes, but Jason's got like feet of snow.
Yeah, snow.
And where Ken lives, it's just too hot to do anything once a year. So,
Hey, we have air conditioning.
In terms of days of cash, I work through the church network. I work with a group called the Metro Network, which are larger churches across the country. We've probably got 400 and 450 of them. We do an annual survey, and the last couple of years, the days of cash available for churches have kind of bounced between 80 and 90. 90 seems to be kind of what the average church is. Last year, I just pulled it up and looked at it. The largest days of cash available for one church was almost 600. So obviously, that's on the outlier of it. But I think 90 days is a goal. Again, some of that's going to be tying back to bank covenants. Our bank requires us to have I mean, as a board, our board got together probably 10 years ago and said, here's our goal, here's our guidelines for the amount of cash we'll have. And it's basically 3 months of payroll, 3 months of debt, 3 months of, reoccurring expenses, leases, utilities, those kind of things. But there again, our bank actually requires us to have about a third of that. So again, internally, we actually have a larger cash reserve than what the bank is requiring. But again, you need to find out what that is as well.
Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have roughly 2 months of cash in reserve right now. And I mean, we're actually talking about, do we utilize that? I mean, we affectionately refer to it as our rainy day fund. And we're like, hey, it's raining. This is, the time to utilize it. And so we've talked about, some of the ways we talked about using that is along the lines of, how to, from a staff standpoint, sustaining payroll. For the next 3 months, our fiscal year ends June 30. So we've been talking in those terms, what's the next 3 months look like? And then what does our next year's budget that we just had approved the bottom line for, that now we're going back and rethinking. So we're looking at how do we utilize that? How is it prudent to use it? I was going to mention Glenn, many years ago, put out an Excel spreadsheet or helped me with one that was on capital reserves. So to go along with what Mark was saying, I mean, you shouldn't only be thinking about what we call our rainy day fund, our unrestricted net asset, but we also have a capital reserve that we're putting money away in to handle those air conditioners and those parking lots and those other major components. Back in the day, it was all based off an Excel sheet that I think Glenn created. So yeah, so those are sort of things that we're doing. Is everyone doing online? Not in our congregation. I mean, so we've had this in 3 weeks that we've been basically doing online. First week saw a 30% drop in giving, but the next week we had a 0%. We met our goal for the week, is middle of the month, and then this last week we saw a 25% drop. So we're zigzagging all back and forth trying to see where that's going to go. We're still seeing about 50-50. We still get mailed in offerings. About 50% of our offering came in mailed in, and the other 50% is online. So
Megan or Ken, you got a quick answer for that question before we move on to the next topic?
Well, from the financial guy, our cash reserves are down. We just completed some remodel where we were self-funding it, but we have been talking to our lender, and I'm working on projections. Somebody can just tell me how long our doors are going to be closed and we're going to be online. That would be a big help to me in my projections. Somebody tell me quick, please. They want me to make projections for the remainder of the year, and I'm going, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So our cash reserves are a little lower, but we communicated to the staff that we're looking at possibility of salary reductions, anywhere from 5 to 25%. We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. So we're waiting and preparing.
What we're suggesting for our clients, that's good, Ken. And if you get those projections ahead of the rest of us, make sure you get that out to us. Let us know when this is going to end. I think we're all very much aware now of the fact that nothing has really changed. We still have to trust God every day, but now we're like, oh, we have to trust God every day. This is the manna from heaven every day. Our source has not changed, but where our resource is coming from may look differently. So our source will always remain the same, but our resource may look differently. So what should that mean? It means that what we're recommending for our clients and our churches is we should use what the Bible says. And it's a really good rule of thumb, right? We should give, we should save, and we should spend. We should give to those who are in need. We should save just like an individual should, 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And we should trust God that if we run through that, he provided for Elijah when the brook ran out. He asked her to go to the widow. I'm sure Elijah was like, did you say go to a window? Is there a window of blessing you want to give me? No, it's a widow. And she only got enough for one meal. And so we have to remember 3 to 6 months, even if the savings runs out, our source is the same. And then we should spend wisely. So those are the things that we're recommending to our clients, and that 3 to 6 months of expenses would be, I would say we should take that not only individually, but corporately as well. And that just applies all the way across the board.
So if a leader has those reserves built up, they might be in a good position. But what about the scenarios of a leadership team that is looking at, they only have 15, 30 days of reserves. They've seen their income drastically drop. We don't know what the incomes are going to be in the next few weeks. How are you recommending, other church leaders look at that if maybe they don't have that cushion? The CARES Act has some opportunities. That kind of goes with the next question of, are any of you looking at the small business loans that convert to grants coming from the CARES Act? And is that something that churches should be looking at? They're saying now that, any loans that are taken that mostly are used for payroll or for healthcare costs can or will, I'm not sure of the language yet, will convert to a grant rather than it being a loan. Is that something that church leaders should be exploring, or are there other things that they need to be looking at before they look at some of the options that are coming with the small business loans and grants through the CARE Act?
I would say quickly, you need to look at all things. Now, like everybody on this call, we're all trying to catch up and struggle and figure it out. And I don't know how many of you, but this is probably my third webinar today. And the other two were on the CARES Act. What does that mean for churches? And do we qualify? The answer is yes. So I do think you want to look at all options. I guess as a former pastor for 20 years, I want us to stand up and walk on our own 2 feet so that we don't have to depend on government funding. But I do think, the thing you've got to be thinking about right now is surviving through these 8 weeks that we know at least we're going to have closures. And again, for some of the regions in the country, this is, coming through later. You're probably going to be looking at June. Think about that. We're going to be exiting this COVID-19 period of closure, walking into what is typically one of our lowest times of giving, and that's the summer. So you've got to have a plan. You've got to think about it. And for that church that doesn't have a lot of reserve, I'm going to go back to just say you've got to cut and cut more than you think you need to cut, because right now you've just got to survive. And think about this, guys, and this is probably some of our struggle. I used to say I never had a real job until I got out of the pastorate, because I went from college to seminary to whatever. Your small business people right now in your church, the couple that owns the Subway shop, they're having serious discussions about what they're going to do and are they going to be able to survive. And if your small business people right now are taking 20, 30, 50% cuts in salary, who are we to think that we're going to escape this? So sometimes just for this immediate, you may have to make some drastic cuts. But the thing is, keep your ministry sustained so that you can keep doing what God's called you to do. And so sometimes you got to make some tough calls and some tough decisions. Make the hard decision now. Don't wait until this fall. It's really going to be too late. Great positive word there, right?
Well,
Glenn, what resources are available?
Yeah. Go ahead, Megan.
I'm so sorry. One real quick thing. I just would want some of the webinars and the things that we've been researching and responding. I would recommend talking to your existing lenders and your CPA relationships as a church before you make any decisions on anything staffing, because it could affect the grant or the loan forgiveness. And so as a recommendation, I would talk to your CPA or your lender before you make any decisions. Gather all your facts, be ready to make your decision, and then check with your CPAs and your lenders, because you don't want something to affect the grant for if you did do something. So that's it. And I'm so sorry. I wasn't sure who I was interrupting, but I apologize.
That's a good word. It's a good word. Glenn, what resources are available to leaders, when they're just trying to process through this? Should we cut staff? Should we go after grants or loans to keep the staff and the operations that we have in place? What resources are available to church leaders that you would recommend just as they're exploring these type of questions?
There are a number of them out there. You were talking about the CARES Act, and I think I've been on 5 webinars since last Thursday on what's the impact, what's it look like, what's it going to do, what can you get, when the Senate passed the first one and it's different than the House, and trying to reconcile all that. I think as church leaders, we need to look at all these things. There are some great resources out there. I just got off of a webinar done by ECFA on the CARES Act that was hosted by Mike Batts, Frank Somerville, 2 great national speakers that have a tremendous amount of information and share a lot of knowledge on sharing it. I think that's a great place to start. Places like ECFA, Works. I think, again, even talking to your bank, a lot of the larger banks are probably already SBA loan lenders, not specific to churches, but SBA loans. So again, I think that's probably going to be places to talk to them. But there again, I don't think you can just talk to your bank and say, well, they have all the answers, because that's not true. I think, Megan was talking about, you need to talk to your bankers. you need to talk to your lenders, you need to talk to your auditors, because I think we've got to collect information from all these sources, put it all together, and then as a church, as an executive group or leadership team or whatever you vernacular you're using in your church, get together and have some solid discussions about what's next. And there again, once you have those discussions, it's probably going back to talk to each of those groups again, talk to the bankers, talk to your auditors, talk to your legal department, and just make some wise decisions by gathering a ton of information, because there is no one single source that has all the answers. But I think we've got to just try and do the best job we can and talk to a lot. Webinars like this are great. The Church Network has done some. There are a ton of webinars out there going on right now, just trying to talk about what are we doing and how are we doing it. So again, those are just a couple to start with.
Cool. Well, as we're approaching the end of our time, Megan, I think we have a couple questions that are coming in through the chat that we might want to try and put in front of the panel. Do you have a couple of those?
Yeah. One is kind of what are some strategies or approaches to roll out online giving for the older demographic in your community?
I think Chris Ackerman should answer first. Not because you're old, I just know that you have personal experience with this with your congregation.
Yes, we have. Obviously, trying to make the giving process as simple as possible. That typically means partnering with some of the great providers out there. You don't need me to list them today, but there's some great ones out there that make giving very simple. Communicating in ways to them that they will hear and receive. So honestly, we did a lot of initial stuff through paper to get them connected, even verifying contact information like email, if they have one. Those are some of the things that we've done. Part of that strategy is a communication strategy from the pulpit and letting people know how they can do that. And again, trying to make it simple. So if they have a recurring gift that's maybe on paper, being able to identify that using whatever tool you might be using for giving. And then, hey, if you're giving that by check every single week, we can actually already help you convert that to a recurring gift. And so how can we make those steps help you do that? So reaching out to them when they are giving by check and helping them make that conversion. Those are some of the things that we did and done well.
What's the risk, Chris, if you don't convert maybe some of the older demographic to online giving? Do you feel like you can still see that regularity in donations come in and via check if we're not in our buildings? I mean, have you thought through the risk reward on that? Is the effort to try and get my donors to switch to online giving right now, or just should they be consistent in the way that they've been giving? What's been some of the messaging that you're choosing to use in your churches for that? Are you focusing on trying to convert the folks to an online gift, or are you just saying just give the way you normally give and just be consistent if you can? What's the best practice for you guys?
D, all of the above. Whatever they're comfortable with, we want to make it as easy as possible. We had one person, just said, hey, I gave online for the first time, and he did it successfully, and he was happy. We even have people dropping their checks off at the church. We'll take it, or mail, however they want to do it. We're still open. We're still doing church, and it's not about the buildings.
I was gonna say, we just on that drive-up drop-off thing, we just actually purchased and are putting out this Wednesday, like the old mailbox, like where you drop we're putting out, so people can drive up in their car, put it in the secured, bolted down thing with all our cameras on it and everything. So that's one of the things that we've done to allow people to continue to give that way. But we've also just been, like I said, 50% of our giving came in via the mail this last 2 weeks. And so we'd love to convert everybody to a recurring online gift. That'd be a goal, but we are also, and that's what we've been asking people to do, but we've also been encouraging people just to keep giving. And again, telling the story of why, what their giving is doing, the impact that their giving is having.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great thing is I think as a church, we need to make sure that we're not just saying, hey, you need to give, but we've got to tell a story. Here's what your money, here's what your contributions, especially in times like this, are doing. Here are people that we are helping. Here are some examples of where we have taken that and are being able to reach out to this group or that group, or maybe it's a need in whatever it is. But I think we as a church have got to make sure that we're doing a better job of telling the story, because I think in the end, it's not just about, hey, you need to give. It's what are we doing with that money to help further the kingdom? And so telling the story through videos, telling it through anything along those lines, obviously now since everything is right now video driven, since that's where we're all meeting, figuring out how to capture that and being able to even reach out to your congregation and go, what are you doing? And try to get some stories from there. But, one is telling a story. I think the other thing, and this is the geeky side of me coming out, but I've been spending, especially over the last 4 or 5 days, a lot of times did an export of a lot of our contribution data, trying to find some trends, look at where people are giving. Is it changing? How is it changing? Are we having more people convert from checks to text to give or online giving, just to try and find some of that? But there again, that's a data question. You got to be able to dive into that data. A lot of mine live in pivot tables because I'm geeky like that. But again, that's part of how I've been able to find some of these trends and communicate with our church as to what are we doing.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with being able to say you have to be able to know where people are moving from recurring to check to online and back and forth, and being able to communicate. So our platform does that, much like your pivot tables, which are fantastic, right? I did those before at one time, and oh my gracious, that's special. But you do have to be able to know those things and then communicate the vision, not only short term but long term, like you just said. And we've got to be able to look at the trends from week to week and have a strategy every week to communicate with them. And I loved what you said, Ken, when you said all of the above, because there are just going to be people by and large who do not feel comfortable with giving online. And so we have to be able to meet people where they're at. And while recurring giving is amazing and awesome and I love it, there are fees that are associated with it. And so we want to be able to steward that well. And we want to be able to know that just recurring giving is not going to solve the underlying issue. The underlying issue is still going to level out at saying, how are we going to get the masses to participate in both stewardship and generosity? We want to be funded by the masses, not by a few. So recurring giving is great, but that's almost like a Band-Aid temporarily. So let's think long-term too.
Yeah. Well, Chris Cahias, we talked a little bit this morning just about some tools that the ministry platform team is brainstorming on, of just to put in front of ministry platform churches to give a lens into that. Do you want to talk a little bit about just some of the things that you're throwing on the wall to see what will stick in order to help ministry platform churches have a little more clarity into what's going on in their giving trends?
I'm probably going to let Megan talk about that a little bit, but yeah, our team has come together. Do we have a screenshot of it? Because we're actually prepping to do a webinar on it next week. Definitely not to the extent of, say, Mortarstone, and probably with not as the same level of geekiness as what Glenn is doing. But we put together, I don't want to commit to the technology yet. It will either be a read-only page or some sort of nightly generated page, but we have worked up kind of a comprehensive snapshot of data across giving units. So I think we're calling it the giving unit summary. It's not a report. It's actually going to be a page in the platform that takes households, pulls them together, and brings in a ton of just key information. So first giving date, last giving date, if they've made the jump to online, there's a ton of data in it. And then we're building a comprehensive list of views so you can quickly slice and dice and see what's going on from a giving perspective. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. Clearly we are a ministry platform. We're going to build something that probably gets you 85 or 90% of the way, but it is built on the platform. So people like Glenn and Jason and all of you who are MP, you'll go slice and dice and hack away, and I'm sure it'll turn into something better in the future. We're going to do, there we go. So we've got some giving unit. This is like a giving unit summary here. So you can see it's tons of summary data that's all being pulled together. We're doing a webinar on this on April 7th. So kind of like Need Connect, we are in full-blown rapid prototype, and we'll be ready to roll it out to all of our churches sometime next week as well. So giving you this summary on the 7th.
Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went through it with Melissa this morning, and we just got it loaded on our system. So if we can end this thing, I can go start playing with it because I'm excited.
Oh, he already loaded it on your system. Of course,
yeah, it is loaded. So let's end this thing.
Would it be fair to also say that as a ministry platform user, you can get our freemium product through Mortarstone for free that also will give you deeper views, taking everything that they've built and maybe going a little, saying, I want to geek out a little bit more. And so you can geek out a tiny bit more through that page.
Megan,
or you can just call Glenn.
I was gonna say Megan Brown. Make sure Trace has a link. Send her a link that has any of that info, and we'll include it in the notes. And because this isn't just MP, like I've been very careful. I don't want to. It's not all about us. It's really just about strategies for the whole church. So I know Mortarstone works with way beyond just the ministry platform ecosystem, and Mark doesn't care what church management system you work with. I'm sure, So I just want to say to the Big C Church, I apologize. I do work for Ministry Platform, and a lot of these guys are my customers, but it is about the strategy for the whole church. And anything we're doing here, I love that Glenn still goes back to Excel, because as long as you can get Excel data out of your church management system, there is a way to go slice and dice this. And at the end of the day, whether it's with Mortarstone or us, or just old school Excel and pivot tables, slice and dice your data, figure out what's going on. And as you've heard countless times today, get ahead of it. Get a plan, get your leadership team together, and get ahead of it.
Chris, if there are churches on here that need some help trying to figure some of that out on an Excel side, I am glad to try and help. I by no means am I going to say that I can answer all the questions, but I am glad to help in any way, shape, or form if somebody wants to reach out to me.
Awesome. And
I think Megan Christensen has some stuff to give away.
All right, Megan, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your time and insights. And we also want to thank all of you listening for joining us today. And we want to have a little fun, as we have on several of our other webinars this week or over the last 2 weeks. And so we did a random drawing, and Miss Patty Walker, you will be getting a Starbucks gift card. So thank you for joining us today. And then if you want to win as well, share your top takeaway from today with the hashtag Taking Church Online on Facebook or Twitter. And you can also win a Starbucks gift card. So like we said, we're trying to get these resources out to the Big C Church, and that's really our heart behind this, is how can we help equip, encourage, and kind of help each other out. So just love all of the information sharing and offers to help, and it just makes our distant world that much closer in this crazy season. So thank you guys so much for joining us. As Chris mentioned, we'll be having a Giving Unit Summary webinar next Tuesday to kind of go over what our team at Ministry Platform has been working on to try to give some insights into this. And thank you so much for joining us. We wanted to let you know that we are praying for you. So particularly Trace on our team, who's been a rock star in coordinating all this. She is also a prayer warrior, and she has been praying for each of you as you attend and as she follows up with you, and our whole team as well. And I'm sure the CITN team as well. Just the church is on our heart, and it's not just our job, it's our community, and it's our people, it's our family. And we love you, and we're praying for you. And we know that God is in control, and he's doing something in all of this. So thank you for joining us and being part of our community. Jason, will you wrap us up in prayer today, please?
Sure will. Father God, we just thank you for this conversation. We pray that we can, we thank you that we can pray, that we can be together and be honest about just the challenges we're facing, the financial struggles that leaders are carrying, the burden that they're carrying for their local churches, God. I pray that you would just give leaders the insight and the wisdom for what's next and how to lead and how to navigate the new normal that we find ourselves in. I pray, God, that we would just see you do amazing things in our communities and around the globe with the church. God, we just pray that we could be along for the ride for what you're going to turn this into, and the story that you're going to turn this into, and how we're going to see the church rise up and be a huge impact, not only locally and regionally, but around the globe. And we just ask God that we get to be part of that. And I pray that you would just continue to resource churches in ways that allow them to be the hands and feet of Jesus in their community. And God, I pray that you would just continue to bless every leader who's taken the time to work through these things on this call today. And I just pray that you would just continue to strengthen the church as a whole, the Big C Church, that we might be a little bit more like Jesus every day. And I pray that you would just use what we've learned today to impact our communities. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jason. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for your time and insights. And we will see you all next time. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark, Megan,
Bye.
everybody.